shooting breeze, walking it through a spreadsheet. But when I saw it as a formal meetup, I said, oh, I better prepare something formal, something we can all chew on. So I made a simple presentation. But so far, I think we're all convinced that we want the basic income. Problem is, it's like you want the chitty chitty bang bang, you want the Batmobile, but how do you construct it versus science behind it? And as a background, yeah, I've been an economist for more than half of my life. I've ventured also into studying international development finance law and also found some problems in the current global financial development frameworks. I'll say it's pretty much like if we want our trains to travel at bullet train speeds, we can't use existing rails or existing engines. We're going to need a different framework for it to achieve higher speeds. So when we're going to talk about a universal basic income to eliminate poverty, we're going to have to operate on another framework, not the current mainstream economic framework that we learn in universities, whether it's from the left or the right. So, what are my critiques? One is, there's a very strong advocacy for applying austerity when economies tank or go wrong. And we're realizing that it doesn't work. It makes things worse. But behind that is a strong ideology that demonizes the poor, and it can be seen psychologically that people think that on the average, 41% of the entire welfare budget that goes on benefits to unemployed people is that size, when actually it's only 3%. People think that 27% of welfare budget is claimed fraudulently. Careful auditing will find out it's only 0.7% of 1%. And people think that 48% of those claiming job seekers allowance go on to claim it more than a year. Apparently it's only a little over 1 out of 4. So there is at the back of many people's heads a tendency to demonize the poor. And we have to overcome that. The other problem we have is we're going through a ridiculous roadmap of how to raise global competitiveness in a country. How? By going on a mad race to the bottom for labor conditions, compensation, and rights. We're saying, oh, China offers these minimum wages, how can we compete with them? Or some mining magnate will say, how can we compete with Africa who pays its workers $2 a day? Well, my answer to her is, why don't you sell your shares and move to Africa? If you like Africa so much. And it's kind of crazy to try to increase competitiveness by whipping your horse to death. It's like whipping your horse to death to make it go faster. Second is the challenge of fiscal conservatism. We got the deficit, so what must we do? Tax more. But as Winston Churchill said, can people tax themselves into prosperity? Can a man stand in a bucket and lift himself up by the handle? Another problem here also is, when you tax incomes, wealth, and expenditures, what are the problems? When you charge incomes, have you ever experienced going to a higher tax bracket after getting a raise and finding out, gosh, it's not worth it? So there's a disincentive to it, or an incentive to cheat. If you charge wealth, what do? They ship their wealth overseas. And if you charge expenditures, you strangle the economy. You tend to save more. So the current tax frameworks, as we know it, won't work. Not if we want to deliver a universal basic income. The other basic problem is money is lent currently into existence. money supply 3, you know what its components are. Checking the money money printed and minted by the RBA, checking accounts, time deposits, savings deposits, and money substitutes like shares and bonds. Would you believe that money supply 3 is 9 times the money printed and minted by the RBA? How has that happened? Because money is lent into existence. Let's say if Adele lends me, deposits $1 million in my bank, assume I'm a banker, and then I can turn around and lend 900,000 to Pia and say, hey, I'll lend you 900,000, but you open a $900,000 account with me. So out of 1 billion in real deposits, I have 1.9 million in deposits. Then I can turn around and who wants to borrow 1.5 million? James, I can lend it to you and say, but you gotta open a $1.5 million account in my bank. Oh, fine. So 1.9 million plus 1.5 billion, I have 3.4 million in deposits. And it goes on and on until I manage to achieve what you call the maximum of a money multiplier. In my calculations here, you'll see it's about 25 times. And the problem of lending money into existence philosophically is there are two ways to conquer and enslave a country, or in this case a person, by force or by debt. Lastly, we tend to sacrifice that which really creates capital in the first place, labor. So you see a logical inconsistency that when you squeeze, when you save, or when you maltreat labor, you can't expect good results. So what are sacrificed? Job security. You have a phenomenon called the precariat, not the proletariat anymore, but the precariat, where people's livelihoods are precarious in nature. Benefits, pensions. Little by little, you're finding out studies that, oh, your super is not super enough. But however, thanks to your super, corporations have fresh capital invested in them. And so welcome to the world of inclusive capitalism, because you are actually investors in corporations. You are capitalists, but have you tried exercising your vote or voice in those corporations? And of course, wages and safety and rights. And so the winner of this week's Race to the Bottom is, now, we don't know what prevents it, but we've identified an austerity trap, the subordination of labor, the tax paradox, money as debt, and the derogation of labor. However, we can afford a period of universal prosperity, or at least the elimination of poverty, because even especially during the worst of times, the wealth has grown wealthier. There is actually a growing productivity because of technology. But where is it going? There is what we call economic rents. It's an old classical economic idea which has lost its meaning and people's awareness of it, because it's not properly being taught in schools. But we'll go to that later. The other thing is, we've forgotten that we can also spend money into existence. I've asked before, if I will tell you that sometime in history, there was a civilization, actually 2 or 3, where there was no central bank and money grew on trees. Would you believe me? Yes. Those of you who are aware of the Incas, the Mayans, and the Aztecs will agree. How did that happen? How does that work? And the last is, and I'd like to call out the neoliberal economists to a very principle that they espouse, but throw out the window when it doesn't work to their advantage. Marginal cost pricing. Take the example, the Sydney Harbour Bridge. What is the cost of the first car crossing the bridge?
Cost of the bridge?
Yeah, the cost of the bridge, enormous. What's the cost of the second car crossing the bridge?
A little bit less.
That's marginal cost pricing. Now, your question is, how do you recover the cost of the bridge? That we will answer later. But a universal basic income is actually marginal cost pricing in action. It actually means minimum wage becomes zero. I'll demonstrate later. Now, how do you achieve economic, a universal basic income? Not through economic equality. You notice this graph shows on the purple the income after taxes and benefits. On the left, the blue, is income before taxes and benefits. So you may divide the economy into two, the leaners and the lifters. Now, right-wing nuts want to apply the principle of fairness to the left, equality. I'll give everyone the same box to stand on. What's the effect? There will be some people who cannot watch the game. And they'll say, tough luck. Why don't you jump? Why don't you grow? But a proper use of economics should be to enable everyone to watch the game. A level playing field is the picture on your right, not the picture on your left. The economy can afford it. Right now, well, based on Oxfam, 62 individuals own as much as the bottom half of the population. 5 years ago, it was 80 or 85. So you can imagine that wealth is growing by leaps and bounds and being concentrated in just a few individuals. And you know that the bottom half of the population grew faster than the top 0.001%. But there's an ideological fear there that's saying, oh, so you're going to take my wealth away from me? The answer is no, not your wealth, but economic rent. When did I tend to discover economic rent? Because in classical economics, what do you get out of labor? Wages, right? What do you get out of interest? Capital. And you have to employ labor to make capital grow. Otherwise, capital naturally depreciates. Now, what do you get from land? Rent. But problem is, rent has been understood as the regular payment of lease for occupying land, which is not exactly the complete picture. Let me demonstrate. About 2 decades ago, I met a group of people from an electric co-op whom corporations wanted to take over. And they were saying, oh, do you know that your cooperative owes the government $15 million? So can you imagine, oh, I own a company that owes that much to the government? So they turn around and say, don't worry, I'll pay you $50 to get that debt out of your minds and let us run the electric co-op. Sounds like a good idea, right? So I put on my investment banking hat and say, okay, how much is the debt again? 15 million. How much are the total assets? 25. Oh, so what's the net worth? 10 million. 10 million divided by 40,000 subscribers, or 100 divided by 4. About $250. How much are they offering you again? $50. Come on, are you going to sell out your shares for $50 now? And it doesn't end there. So I look at their portfolio and say, okay, so 10 million is your net worth. How much is land? Oh, 5 million. When was the last time it was valued? 20 years ago. 20 years ago when there was a war. Okay, now that it's peaceful, and how much would it cost? Easily 10? Easily 10, okay. So 50 million, that's an extra $45 million to add to the net worth of 10 million. So 55 million divided by 40,000 becomes, you do the maths. And how much is a corporation offering you again? So the ending was, they fought tooth and nail for the corporation not to take over the electric co-op. But the economic rent there is actually the incremental increase of land values created by the establishment of peace, the cooperation of the people in the area. That wealth belongs to them, but because the people are ignorant about it, they were ready to part with it. And that is what I'm trying to call our attention to. There is economic rent out there that is being taken from us without our knowing, through tax breaks, through creative policies like negative gearing, which encourages speculation, that drives people who actually need to live in houses out of the market, out of an affordable market. And you'll see in this graph, 1911, you saw a tax rate of 6% taken from income, and the gray is privatized land rent, which is actually the rent I described to you, rising land values that are pocketed by private individuals and corporations. It has grown to 26% of Australia's GDP, larger than the tax collected from the economy. So you can imagine, if we can get the appropriate share of economic rent from the economy, we will have more than enough to eliminate poverty. Adding to that is technological dividends. Look at how much labor productivity in the OECD countries increased from 1999 to 2013. Almost 17%. But how much has wages grown? A little over 5. Where do you think the technological dividends go? That's part of economic rent for you. Economic rent may not just be spelled in land values, but also in labor savings. It should actually go into investments of using labor for more productive uses. The third, just getting to the framework, is seigniorage and the Henry George effect. We did it before with the Sydney Harbour Bridge. If you're familiar with its history, how did it pay for itself? When the New South Wales government acquired the land on both banks of the river and built the bridge, North Sydney land prices shot up to approximate CBD prices. And from that gain, they managed to pay back the loan on time. You don't pay your loan early, you lose money. So they paid it on time. And up to this very day, still charges very competitive, or very cheap, I don't want to use the term competitive, but competing with the other projects, cheap tolls. Enough to cover maintenance, upgrade, upkeep. Now that's marginal cost pricing for you. It is a technique we have forgotten to apply to current infrastructure projects. And we have to remember it and apply it again. And it's actually revisiting an old idea. Is that face familiar to you? Joseph Stiglitz, former chief economist of the World Bank. He did his one of the works he made was on the Henry George effect, where he proved under certain conditions that land values grow by a corresponding multiple to the cost of infrastructure and basic services delivered in that community. So what does that tell you? Infrastructure and basic services can pay for themselves. It also responds to the challenge, oh, money creation, isn't that inflationary? Okay, if you're so concerned about excess liquidity triggering inflation, then tax it out of existence. And after taxing, you have more money for the good stuff. And eventually, what do we achieve here? The volunteer efficient economy. I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of stories of how valuable but unprized volunteer labor is. And it struck me one day when I rode a cab, and the cab driver was a genetic engineer. I thought he was pulling my leg until I was discussing whatever little I knew, but he knew it hell of a lot. So okay, what's the story? He finished his degree in Delft University in the Netherlands, and he was doing good money. He and his wife was a nurse, so they were both making good money until they started having children, and the state, Netherlands, was not enabling them to have permanent residency. So they had to start paying full costs for their children's hospitalization, the wife's delivery, education, and so on. I couldn't afford to live in Europe. So he ends up in Australia, says, I'm happy, I can't complain, I drive a cab, my kids go to school, I got health coverage, I'm happier here. Oh, good on you. So I asked him a question. Now, if you had the basics covered for your family, would you choose to continue driving a cab to earn extra money? Or will you volunteer your services as a genetic engineer? And he gave me a weird look, saying, why are you even asking me that question? Of course I'll volunteer as a genetic engineer. And it struck me, wow, a genetic engineer for free. Marginal cost pricing for you. Of course, there was a right wing nut who spoiled my parable by saying, so who's going to drive the cabs? Oh boy, that's a real heavy problem, isn't it? Now, before I proceed with the balance sheet, I'll let you go through a thought experiment. 3 Aussies go to a bar. It may be a joke, but bear with me. When they go to the bar, it's $5 a schooner, right? So the third mate is entrusted to go to the bar where he discovers, it's a $12 jug special. A jug has about $4.01 milli, right? So what would be a fair dinkum thing to do? He can pocket the $3 and drink the 1.5 schooners of beer for himself, because that's his reward for enterprise and effort, right? And it's his two-mate's fault. He should have gone to the bar too, right? So, and besides, didn't the two acquire their schooners at a mutually agreed fair market value. Sounds so Wall Street. But is it fair income? Of course, we know that if you focus on the individual or sum of separate individual wealth, rather than the wealth of the social whole or social organism, you see opportunities for grabbing that economic rent for yourself. In this case, economic rent is $3 of savings and $1.5 schooners of beer. That kind of framework also condones rent-seeking behavior as entrepreneurial. It also reduces the value of wealth to the sheer basis of exchangeability. Hey, you agreed on $5, what are you complaining about? The same way, hey, you agreed on buying my US subprime for this price, no recourse, what are you complaining about? And the problem there is that the privatization of that synergy created. I'd like to also define economic rent as synergy that belongs to everyone and not to one single individual. And the fourth mate joins, gender sensitive. So the fourth mate is a girl, is a lady. Do you let him buy do you let her buy her own grog? Nah. Do you charge her for the beer? Even more so. You shelter the schooner, right? Sounds like a universal basic income. Everyone has beer. Everyone's better off. Everyone has more money for the next round, right? So, what the mainstream economics say, oh come on, shouting the beer diminishes the wealth of the three. Ah, you want me to pay for your universal basic income? Well, no, you won't be paying. You won't be paying for it. It's free. Well, charging the beer increases the group's wealth. Yeah, but there'll be less money available for the next round. And buying his own beer is bare business for the bar, is it really? Because if you look at the numbers, it's really better to buy a job, shout the fourth mate the beer.
I know people think I'm Irish. I'm only half Irish. I don't drink alcohol. What's a schooner?
Schooner is that tall glass.
I know it's a glass, but in relation to a jug, how much is it?
It's like
Okay.
Scooter's 425, Millie's 285. Oh my god, I'm in film for this
Oh,
one.
Yeah, I know,
A
right?
pint is 600, a jug is, I don't know.
Yeah, but
So how many schooners?
It's smaller than a pint.
Yeah.
4, okay.
yeah, but imagine a jug would contain 4.5 times that amount.
Okay.
Okay, so think of ratios and formulas. So, before I go to the spreadsheet, what would the new framework cover? One is move from taxing economic activity towards sequestering economic rent. So it's not a tax. A tax is smacks of like the government comes in and says, give me my share of your economic activity. Sometimes you'll say, what share? You were in the way, you are. Right? You want your share? You really want your share? I'll probably give him the boot, right? But what we are getting here is sequestering economic rent that really doesn't belong to an individual in the first place. So where could those economic rents be spotted? Location or site? Or currency transactions? It struck me at one time where during the Asian financial crisis, when I was in the Philippines, Mindanao, especially that place adjacent to Indonesia, my friend was saying, we produce better rice and cheaper rice, I mean on a productivity basis, than Indonesia. How is it that they managed to swamp us with the rice? And Filipinos are actually smuggling the rice in. And I go, it's because their currency plunged. So it's really cheaper to buy rice at probably 1/3 the price of Philippine rice and mix it with local rice and make a profit. Yeah, so currencies contain economic rents in themselves. When you exchange it, economic rents change hands. So I am inclined to support a Tobin tax to be able to capture that rent, especially if it's purely on a currency basis. When you buy bonds, when you sell bonds, when you buy shares, when you sell shares. So the second thing to do is to wean away from the fractional reserve system, banking system that I described. Imagine everyone in this room, okay, how much we have together. And let's say Peter lent me his iPhone. Do we get any richer by that act? No. And that is a basic problem. Obligations by themselves do not generate new wealth. But our framework says it does. By the very act of Adele, say, depositing $1 million and me lending it to Pete, 900,000 to Peter, I'm saying, hey, I just created 900,000 worth of new wealth. I would create new wealth if, after borrowing Peter's phone, I phone my broker and say, sell shares and I make money. But just a simple act of lending me the phone does not generate wealth. And we are under the delusion that that has already generated wealth.
But in the case of lending the phone is unutilized a lot of the time. And so by lending the phone, you transfer, like you give the phone and then you can utilize it. You can utilize it, right? So the value of the phone increases. So the value of this whole system increases. Now, if you're talking about the lending of money, a very wealthy person who has money, if they lend it to someone who's poorer, even at a reasonable interest rate, the poorer person can actually make better use of the money than the richer person. So, like, there is a value in that system because the capital, while it's just sitting there as an underutilized asset, lending it out increases the value of the whole system.
You had a very key term there, use. If I use it, sure, but what if I don't?
What would be the point in borrowing it if you weren't going to intend to use it in the first place?
Oh, speculating on it's depreciating or appreciating.
Well, that's still using it though.
The use part,
Using it, you know, based on what? A lot of expectations. But have you actually produced a good and service from it? No. And well, going back to Adam Smith, the wealth of a nation is in the goods and services one produces. Not intending to produce, but what one produces. Okay.
That sounds like a different thing though, in that when you're talking about economy and we're talking about money as opposed to value, although money is a representation of value, it doesn't actually translate accurately because you can unlock a lot more value out of a lot less money based on the efficiency of use. So
imagine the whole US subprime woke up, if you watch The Big Short, woke up on the realization, shucks, I was lending money to a stripper who bought 4 apartments, rented them out, and wasn't paying a mortgage because, hey, I'm proud to say I own 4 properties, thanks to my boyfriends. So, and then the whole system wakes up and, oh, shucks. We're just fooling ourselves. Where was the good and service produced other than...
Okay, well, can I just pursue that a little bit further? If you were to have, say, everyone in this room were to share 2 iPhones for the lot of us, which obviously is going to in some way be very efficient, and the idea of doing that is therefore the creation of wealth, because we've now increased our immediate efficiency. So the very act of giving you the iPhone is expressing an idea. Hey, look, we can share this iPhone. We can share a house. We can have Uber type taxis. Now that idea is the creation of wealth. So when I lend you a phone, I can be creating wealth, surely.
Until you realize that my intention was to destroy it. Call the problem. Create a prank that can get everyone in this room into trouble. See, use. It's not the idea. It's like you're free to dream. But you have to, it's a field of dreams. It's until they come where you say, hey, the baseball field I created is worth something. And so the third important component is to engage in seigniorage, which is spending money into existence by organizing a development bank of Australia. On hindsight, I think it was a strategic mistake of privatizing the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. It could have assumed a more developmental role.
Well, it was originally.
Yeah.
It was intended to be just that.
But I myself was brainwashed into this mantra that says, no, the monetary system must be free from politics. You have to make a definite fine line between monetary policy and fiscal policy and leave monetary policy in the hands of the private sector as much as possible. Well, the problem there is currency is a social commons, like the internet. Cooperation creates value of the currency. It's not, a currency is valuable not because the RBA says it's value or the bank says it's value. It's because we agree. We believe that that is a value until we realize.
It is partly because of the RBA saying it has value. So
Partly.
when we every year we have to denominate our taxes in Australian dollars, and the government says you have to pay your taxes in Australian dollars, and if we keep saying no long enough to paying in Australian dollars, eventually they'll shoot us.
If we find a good reason, like a US subprime crisis, if we find a good reason, like as much as 60% of real estate, new real estate, is not occupied, then we raise questions. Is the RBA really saying that's what it's worth? If you watch that Big Short movie, it's an interesting case where, these two clients of the doctor with an investment banker goes, you come to work in t-shirts, shorts, and slippers, and you think you know more than Alan Greenspan? And he goes, yes. And he did. So it's not enough that they said it is. We really have to investigate and study for ourselves. What is the true value? It's scary, but our ignorance is someone else's power. And the fourth is fiscal and monetary policies must be properly used as complementary rather than contrary. Accelerator and clutch for those who drive standard H shifts. Then an accelerator and brake. Because that's what they teach in the textbooks. Hey, if there's a fiscal deficit, it's inflationary, what do you have to do next? Oh, come in with a contractionary monetary policy. Hey, but you're strangling the economy when you go contractionary. So the government says, no, we've got to spend money and have a deficit. Now, look what you've done. Now we're going to have to contract money supply again. It becomes ridiculous. Or okay, you want to spur economic growth, so we'll lower interest rates. Hey, you're causing inflation. What do we do? Well, tax money out of existence. Hey, but so it triggers a kind of ridiculous vicious cycle in the end. Now let's go to the spreadsheet.
Right there.
What's the spreadsheet?
iPad there. Desktop.
So it's a lot of columns. But the first column would be my projected growth rate in GNP. And
You guys wanna
negative
sit
1
closer?
would be,
Now I do.
right?
You can zoom in a little bit if you press Control.
I'll grab the mouse. Maybe that'll help.
Yeah.
Well,
Just want to go through one column at
Just
a
zoom
time.
in a bit. Yeah.
I have to, what's more important is how these columns interact. So I won't go one column at a time, but explain their interaction first. So you have the GNP. Okay, good. Excellent. 2015 is 1.376 trillion. I measured the tax rate to be 29.07% based on how much taxes they projected. And real estate values would be 7.2 trillion, culling it from different sources. So far we have a zero land value tax. MB is monetary base. That's the money printed and minted by the RBA. Money supply 3 is what I described earlier, what the RBA produced, minted, savings deposits, time deposits, demand deposits, and money substitutes. I put a Robin Hood tax of 0.5%. Actually, I shouldn't be putting that there because nothing's been charged. So, the money multiplier is 25, given the current. It's not really reserve requirements now, but the cap on liquid assets the bank must have in order to meet withdrawals on demand. So, given that cap, a bank can actually produce 25 times the money originally deposited.
That's a question on that. Is the Australian monetary system the same as modeled the same as the US monetary system?
Different.
Because like I've got like I kind of know how the US monetary system is developed and how they generate money and wealth with the Reserve Bank and the government, but I'm not quite sure how the Australian one does it between the Australian and the US
the
one.
same, but the big difference is the Federal Reserve System is a private stock corporation whose officials are appointed by government, but it's a private stock corporation. And just to digress a bit, the problem there is, as a private stock corporation in charge of a social commons, whose interests are they actually serving? The balance sheet of the Federal Reserve or the economy? That's the first level of conflict of interest. The second is, the Federal Reserve System is owned by private banks. Now, who will the private banks be loyal to? The spreadsheet, the financial statements of the Federal Reserve or their financial statements? You can work the complexity when it goes back to the economy. Do they really care about the economy? So, in this manner of fractional reserve banking, yes, Australia operates pretty much like the US. In terms of structure, ownership structure, now RBA fortunately is government, truly government institution. But remember that the share of Australia's global currency is really small. So it can, its clone, the clone of the Federal Reserve System is the European Central Bank. It's also a private stock corporation. They are not accountable to Europeans. They're accountable to the banks that invested in them. And now you know why Greece is Greece, Italy, Spain, and Portugal. And this is the total portfolio of banks. This is how much is paid in pensions. 40 billion is paid outside in terms of cost of paying for the cost of other living of the bottom 25%. So the development budget is 400 billion. Total spent on welfare is 190. For others, including infrastructure, is 210. my target was, actually it should be, this is 396,000 billion, or 396,000 million, or 396 billion. That's my target for a UBI, a referential UBI, because with that, every Australian can get $18,000 a year. So that doesn't mean everyone will want it. I mean, if you tell Aborigine in the Whoop, hey, you've got $18,000 a year, he'll go, so? What do you want? Well, I'd like you to respect my right to live in my land on my terms, whatever that will cost. But the thing here is, there will be economic resources available for him to employ to defend his rights. So, let's walk through what happens every year. First year, imagine, we can cut the income tax rate to 15% and be competitive with Hong Kong and Singapore. Oh, can you imagine what that will do to your take-home pay for those who are employed? Real estate. Now, what I was recommending is, if we will reduce tax rates by that much, that the RBA introduces 57.7, let's make it 60 billion dollars of fresh money into the system through Development Bank of Australia. Where is the DBA? There, DBA. Development budget, DBM would be the development budget generated by money. So, the reason why it grows from 2.7 to 67.55 is it also, like a bank, uses its money multiplier. Think of it this way. If the bank will go into infrastructure lending, it can do the same as banks and say, okay, the project will deposit money in my bank, which you can use to lend again. But that's one way of looking at the money multiplier. I'll just finish now. The other way of looking at the money multiplier is, you don't give $18,000 a year lump sum as a citizen's dividend. You give it fortnightly, 52 times 2, so that's 104. So you don't need that whole amount. You just need to turn it around every 2 weeks to produce that. Okay.
Yeah, so the money multiplier, obviously, that happens in the banking system right now. But when you take government currency and you release it into the world to be spent, you do get a money multiplier effect, but the only way that you get to hold on to the whole of the money multiplier effect is if you prevent the government spending to go anywhere except for Australian projects.
Yes.
So you'd have to say, no workers, no machinery, no computers, no software would be able to come from anywhere except for Australia, which is like a bit hard, isn't it?
I don't think that's true. I'll respond in a way that it's related to the fear that printing money will generate hyperinflation like they did in Latin America or the Weimar Republic in Germany. But if money creation by itself triggers inflation, how come quantitative easing has not triggered inflation in the United States? And here's the basic answer. When the Weimar Republic and Latin America debased its currencies, it was really to pay off debt. So the international market says, oh, the new money you created is worthless because you're just simply trying to get out of the debt trap we put you in. But if it's applied like Marshall Plan, quantitative easing with wars in the Middle East, then you print money to generate value. And a lot of the US money printed for the Middle Eastern War bought goods from outside. So I will challenge that paradigm based on history, what history has shown.
But, well, I mean, one of the reasons why it didn't cause inflation was because of the contracting of the money supply as a whole, as a result of banks being unwilling to lend money to people anymore. So, like, you had, despite the fact the government was printing like mad, because the total loan books of all the banks were actually decreasing with time, that meant that there wasn't more money supply, and hence the value of the US currency stayed roughly flat.
And I know they spent it abroad and flew it to financial havens, because financial havens grew. I mean, deposits in financial havens grew enormously from 2008 to today. So again, spent abroad, deposited abroad, fueling what we have right now. Now, in answer to that also, it may be related to the UBI, but the way the US could have gotten out of the bind was not to bail out the banks, but to bail out the first-time homeowners, to bail out the tenants who bought the properties through strippers that simply leveraged the money to buy as much properties as they bought. The effect would be better because the banks would still get the cash once the bailout goes through them and service the depositors. People would not lose their homes. There would be liquidity to continue financing industries and the economy. And we wouldn't have had the mess in the US that affected the rest of the world. So that is why I say the monetary system here, understanding the monetary system here in its proper context is important in order to deliver not just a UBI, but to avoid the entire trap of austerity.
So just going back to that original point about the development bank, how much gets put into it to begin with?
That's more, those are my projections.
67.
The 67.55 will be generated from 2.7 billion in freshly created money.
Okay. Yeah. So that means that your model assumes that 100% of the money multiplier goes through the development bank specifically.
Mm-hmm.
But why wouldn't it be multiplied through the other banks? Why wouldn't the money multiplier, like the money multiplier exists across the whole system?
Yes.
Not just a specific bank.
It could go through the banks. That doesn't. But then again, here's the other thing. The reason why I'm looking at the Development Bank of Australia participating here is it's fresh money going through the system, rather than having other banks fully enjoy it. I think it's best to be in the hands of a government institution that can monitor and really address. So it's like imagine Centrelink becoming a bank. And rather than playing freeloader Nazi, really goes after people. You're homeless, let us help. You're sick, let us help.
Yeah, I'm not criticizing. It's a great idea to use government money in good ways for society. Just the element of like how much you get back in return. So like your spreadsheet might go a bit different. Like the other banks might go up a bit more in terms of how much deposit books they have, rather than what the government actually has to spend on the development.
I'll have to say that this spreadsheet is actually conservative downwards, which means it can be better than we think. So, okay. So in first year alone, the development budget goes from 400 to 429. Welfare, what is made available for welfare increases. Imagine that's, okay, so now we can go work backwards. Using that kind of cycle, we can see a gradual growth of what is available for welfare growing over 5 years. Based on the infusion of currencies over 5 years of 2.7 when the system gets used to it, inject 10, 20, and 40, 80, or 100. Now you're saying, what kind of project to do that? We've got enormous projects, I think, that we can put in the pipeline, like a high-speed railway. Like, canals that can decongest the floods of the north and irrigate the south. Some solar farms, wind farms, tidal farms, geothermal. So we've got enormous potential there. Coconut industries in the north, new crops, growing new crops, enabling populations to come to Australia so that we have enough people to build this infrastructure and use them. And that would also mean we'll have to start weaning away from fractional reserve banking, raising required reserves from 25 to 4. And the reason why I'm making it gradual is I wouldn't want to be accused by banks saying, you're going to reduce our lending portfolio. No. The reason why we're infusing money to come in is to replace money created through debt with money created through seigniorage or spending. So we're replacing bad money with good over time. And we're not going to shock the system. Yes?
Just on the money multiplier, you go from a factor of 25 down to 4 in 6 years.
Yeah.
That's quite a big change.
Yes.
And you say that the bank portfolio goes from 1376 to 1444 and then stays flat.
Yeah. That's right. I'm trying to work on it from that parameter.
Okay. So I'm not quite sure where the additional funds come from.
That's why we're introducing this much currency into the system that will be spent, but will form part of the portfolio of the Development Bank of Australia.
So that's additional currency that's being printed
Yes,
per year.
which the other banks will also benefit from, because hey, money is going to flow all over the place. So we're not shocking the system. It's like it's like weaning a drug addict from drugs to healthy food.
Okay, so like that, I like the idea that it's not shocking the system, because like a lot of people come along and they get shut down straight away because they go, no, we have to change everything, and think crazy things can happen. But where do you see it going once you've weaned down that level? Because like obviously, I mean, the way I see the monetary system, the problem is you start off with 10 billion or whatever, and then you lend it all out, but then when you pay it back with interest, you're actually having to have more money than you've lent out come back in, which is impossible, which means you need to make more money and so on and so forth. So obviously that system isn't great, especially if you want to have an economy that keeps running forever. So where do you see this going?
It'll go towards a more stable financial system. And the reason being is, do you know why credit unions and microfinance institutions seem to have a higher repayment? I mean, what properly run, that is, have a higher repayment than professionally run banks. The reason is they do not lend money until it is paid back to them. How microfinance works is, let's say we're 5 in a cell. We will borrow $10,000, but your ability to borrow $10,000 depends on my repaying it first, and your ability to borrow will depend on his repaying it first. So we, as a cell, watch over each other and make sure that we pay our debts so that everyone gets to borrow. And as the portfolio grows, we are able to borrow funds, actually fragment the loan, so it's possible that you to have 7,500 at the same time circulating. And as it grows, you can start going from a small industry to a slightly larger, and so on and so forth. Credit unions do the same thing. They cannot lend money until money is paid back. So what you will have is a more stable financial system in the process. But we'll talk about who will be against the system. Obviously, I think from this point, you can find out. Based on the multiple of money supply 3, can you imagine money supply 3 almost the same amount as our GNP? And I'll give you another interesting tidbit. Money supply 3, the GNP is practically the same amount as our entire pension system, all our pension funds, which makes you think, is the economy running on the workers' pension funds? But who's benefiting from these pension funds? And why are we being told that our pension funds are not enough for our retirement? Go figure. What you will notice also is GNP growth will go through a certain cycle. It will shoot up to in year 1, because can you imagine what happens when you cut taxes and you have more money to spend? And people who work for the dough actually choose to volunteer for jobs that they're good at, rather than forced by Centrelink and their cronies to work for. And like in any business cycle, there will be a gradual decline and a rise again. It pretty much is consistent with observations that there are 5-year business cycles. This is the technical point. But what I'm pointing out here, and here also, you can see tax rates reduced from 15% to 5%. You can imagine how much capital will want to come to Australia at that rate. And you can also imagine that we're not killing real estate. Eventually, as we build infrastructure, its values will grow. What you are dampening here are speculative attacks on real estate. Why will they grow? Because we will have money. We have produced infrastructure and basic services that communities need and raise land values. Henry George effect, Joseph Stiglitz. Anyway, this spreadsheet will be made available.
Yeah, we'll post it up to the Facebook group in the meetup.
Yeah, I did. So, over 5 years, you can imagine the benefits. Greater take-home pay. Just as to give you an impression, Hong Kong and Singapore, I think, generate as much as 30 to 35% of their government revenues from land values. Their tax rates are pretty flat, 15%, no exceptions. And Singapore, I remember making this computation back in 2000. If no Singaporean had worked that year, they'd still be getting a per capita income of 1/3 of what was posted that year. Just sheerly from earnings from government, from gross international reserves. So you can imagine that the government will also generate international reserves that will generate revenues that will diminish the need for taxes and possibly diminish the need for money creation. The development bank's portfolio will be 500 billion. And the target of $18,000 a year for every Australian will be not just met, but actually exceeded. Given that spreadsheet under this framework. So it works why does it work better? You have so many reasons. More disposable income, more productive and less speculative investments, more available and affordable credit, more infrastructure, less capital flight while raising the cost of flying off with capital because of the Tobin tax. Inflation is curbed by taxing the higher land values arising from government spending, and subsistence cost is not a worry of the worker or the employer. Marginal cost pricing of labor will be in effect. You can have a volunteer economy. The beauty of the volunteer economy is you can imagine if that genetic engineer volunteers, you think he will volunteer all his life? He'll start generating value greater than what he would have earned as a taxi catcher. You'll see the creativity of people unleashed like never before. At least that's how I see it. Even if no one loses, we will have big opportunity losers. The banks, speculators in land and currency, they'll hate this. Economic rent seekers like privatizers will start saying, hey, the reason why you want to privatize is you want to grab the economic rent for yourself. Oppressive employers who rely on desperate people for jobs. And the best politicians money can buy. They will hate this. But who will like it? Honest to goodness entrepreneurs. People who can actually inspire people to work for them. Sincere volunteers, especially among the unemployed and retired. Credit unions and microfinance institutions will be on a level playing field, because the banks will be forced to play by their stable rules. The homeless and unemployed, whom no one can demonize anymore. And a growing middle class that can no longer be bullied. And that's the end game. And what will it cost us? You know they catch monkeys in Africa, right? They put money in money, food. It might, because I was thinking human beings. They put fruits and nuts in the ground or in a coconut shell, through a hole big enough for an open hand to come in, but too small for a clenched fist to come out. And they catch the monkey because the monkey refuses to let go of the fruits and vegetables. I thought it was an urban legend until I saw a real video where it happens. And that's basically part of our human nature. Many will not let go of the status quo and be afraid of a new framework. Wait.
Wow.
What about my mortgage? I've already paid so much of it, and you're going to... Hey, come on, relax. I'm close to earning passive income. You're going to get it anyway. It's not going to be taken away. I mean, you're going to have those. And the funny thing is, who's going to drive the taxi cabs? The important thing is to be able to let go of the status quo, of the wrong framework, and see the possible. And it is possible. Okay, I guess that's it for tonight.
Ah, great.
That's fantastic.
Great, thanks.
Look, we still have quite a bit of time, and why don't we just first introduce ourselves, and what's your name, what you do, and what got you interested in basic income, and then maybe we can do a pros and cons of basic income exercise, and Joffre can comment about it. So yeah, sure, Dave.
Oh, they already know I'm half Irish, so start, start the other side of the room.
The other side, okay, yeah, sure.
Well, I don't really know much about basic income, so probably not a good place to start, but I'm Adele, and my brother told me about this, and I thought it sounded curious. So I thought I'd come along. What do you mean the pros and cons? What do I think?
Oh, that's okay. That's an exercise after we all introduce ourselves. Yeah.
Oh, Mike. Hi, everybody. I've been involved a lot in the last 30 years creating let systems. I'm sure we know what they are. And when I think you said money doesn't grow on trees, well, that's exactly when we created the one up in Mullaney. We actually called our credit system, we call them bunyas, and of course, so money did grow on trees, but from the bunya nut trees. So I'm very interested, obviously, in all this. I have been for a very long time. I'm closely following. Sorry, I didn't mean to have my back to you guys. Closely following what's going on in Finland at the moment. I was going to pose that question to you to give us your opinion of what's happening in Finland and the success. I believe it is already very successful, and so there are role models already on the planet that we could perhaps follow. Yes, that's sort of in a nutshell why I'm here.
So, hi, my name's Tristan. I came along to the Future Day a few weeks ago and thought that this seemed like a fascinating group of people with interesting ideas that I would like to hear about. I don't really know a whole lot about universal basic income or have any strong convictions one way or the other, but yeah, it's just one of many interesting ideas that I'd like to learn more about.
Cool, thanks, Chris. Hey everyone, I'm Rob. So I came along to the Future Day as well, and I've been looking at a lot of posts on Facebook for the transhumanist group, which I'm still learning quite a lot about. I like the idea of basic income, but I came along because I was curious in how it can be feasible.
Okay. Yeah.
Don't want to steal you.
Yeah, no, it's alright. I'm Peter Singh. I work at Deloitte. I started in business tax and now working with Centre for the Edge and looking at ways we can, what is happening in the next 3 to 5 years and beyond to impact our businesses. So I'm interested in basic income because there's a whole hype about automation. What is the future workforce like? And how does the robots then take over the world, right? How can that? Where does humanity fit in all that?
My name is Damien Penston. I'm the head of Fair Money Australia. So we're a group that does research on macroeconomics and talks to economists as a hobby. And so we look at problems, challenges facing society like unemployment, inequality, growth, diminishing access to education, healthcare, all these things. We try to figure out what are the root causes, which are typically monopoly rights and privileges related to money creation and land ownership. And we then start looking at how we can create solutions which are fair. That's fair money. And basic income, macroeconomics, geek out.
I'm Chris. I'm here just looking at the feasibility of it all and how we can implement it as opposed to whatever happens, 10, 20 years down the track where it's already in. You need to get that first step going first.
I'm Charlotte. I'm here just because I read a little bit about universal basic income and I thought it sounded like a cool idea, but I wanted to see how people are articulating it in terms of motivation and actually presenting plans for feasibility. So this is awesome.
Okay, I'm James. I'm an engineer working in AI, have done for many years. I'm primarily in robotics. I'm building the machines that are going to take over the world. But I am specifically here, and I'm very interested in the topic of how we redistribute the wealth when we start having machines that are both as good as us at basically everything that we do currently that produces wealth.
And James?
Yeah, I'm James, and I'm primarily interested in developing like equality across the globe and bringing up everyone to an equal playing field in monetary wealth, so that we, kind of like Star Trek world, where we can do what we want to do rather than what we have to do to live. I could have done so much more if I didn't have to pay rent all the time.
Hi, I'm Christian. I study biochemistry at UCS. I'm just generally interested in futurist ideas, transhumanism, genetic engineering, but also in social questions and social problems, because those need to be addressed to have a future that's worth living in. And UBI and the system formulated or presented here looks like one good way of achieving that or making it worth living in. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Gavin. I work in the library information services industry, and that's basically being killed by automation. So I'm rather interested in what can we do with ways of helping people sort of able to make ends meet without having to jump up and down and bounce off the walls trying
industry, I really like the idea of a basic living wage handed out to everybody, because the automation, the wave of automation that's already here and that's coming is going to just totally shit all of the economy up and down left and right. So if there's not something in place to deal with it, then the whole thing's fucked. So, like, what are they called? Uber's got the driverless car already driving around San Francisco. It's something like 11.5 million jobs in the States are dependent on driving, and they're going to go in like 4 years. So what happens when, you know, half of the population of Australia is unemployed for no reason, almost overnight?
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Lisa. We were talking about this yesterday, and then Christian, I think you invited me. Okay, cool.
Good idea, Christian.
I think from the group because I've implemented UBI in Australia.
Okay.
Just universally.
Probably got added into that as well. Thanks for coming though.
Yeah, I work in government marketing, and I also am friends with a lot of volunteers who do various levels of volunteer work in the arts mostly. So it's kind of interesting, like, you know, hearing a little bit more about the volunteer economy, because yeah, we do a hell of a lot of work that just is completely unrecognised, and yeah, there's a lot of things go on that don't involve the monetary system at all. So yeah.
Thanks.
I'm Tim. I'm a corporate lawyer. I'm just interested in the concept generally, and I thought I'd come along and just hear a little bit more about. I'm interested in the current presses in Finland and see how that goes in long term.
Cool. Thanks, Tim.
I'm Mark. I work in big data and machine learning at Combank. Just articulate, as a few other people articulated, AI is coming. It's going to automate a lot of our boring jobs. Productivity increases. How do we distribute that wealth more evenly to benefit everyone and ultimately improve the health of the economy?
Thanks, Mark.
And my name is James Jansen. I'm the leader of the Science Party, which is until recently known as the Future Party. I'm interested in basic income because I was a long-term welfare recipient myself up until the age of 22. And I see a lot of problems with the current system, a lot of disincentives to get up and help yourself, where you end up being taxed, effectively being taxed at rates well above any corporate citizen in this country would be paying, into the 60s and 70s and up to 85% back when I was on youth allowance. And that actually stops people from participating where they can. So I actually come from a little bit of a different perspective. I think that we've got jobs for a little while yet. When we stop having drivers, we'll probably have a lot more geneticists and the like. There's a lot of problems to solve, but there's not a lot of incentive for people to go up, because as soon as they try and help themselves up, they're being pushed down by effective taxes. So I like the idea of UBI. It means that you can do smooth welfare, but there's a cost issue associated with it as well that I'd like to see fixed up.
Cool. Thanks, guys. All right, so we'll start writing stuff on the wall. So from what I heard was obviously I'm pretty biased about automation. I'm a terrible writer. Does anyone have a really good writing hand? Okay. I heard Finland is doing it. Is doing it.
Really good rally card writers.
Yeah. Seriously, I'm a terrible whiteboarder. I'm trying to be a design thinker. Is like, it's really hard. Yeah. So, any other pros for a basic income that you guys want to mention?
Smooth welfare function.
Okay.
Volunteer society as well. That's
Yeah.
Smooth with it.
Oh, okay. So imagine you're currently getting, say, $13,000 worth of Centrelink at the moment. You go from, you can start earning about $2,000 per year, and then when you get up to $2,000 per year, suddenly you're getting, when you've earned $2,000 per year, every dollar after that suddenly gets taxed at effectively 50%, because you lose $50 cents for every dollar that you earn in your job. So it's a really high tax rate. That's higher than anyone else is paying in the country. But it gets worse, because after a while, suddenly real taxes start kicking in, and you lose your welfare dollars, in addition to being taxed on your welfare, because welfare is a taxable income as well. So like, you'll end up being taxed at 65% or more. And depending on where you jump in, and this happens a lot with families as well, you have various benefits that you start to lose. So if they do things like means test the childcare benefit that the government currently gives out to everyone, that means after you earn a certain amount of money, you lose your childcare benefit. So if you earn that $1 extra, you lose $3,000. So that's a real disincentive to young families, and especially women in that case, to earn that extra buck. And that's a bad thing, because we want people on the lower end of the scale to be earning more. So that's, smooth welfare functions.
Cool. And feel free to come up to the board. There's quite a few of these. I really don't. Please. I need a scribe. And then I can record the scribe. Or who wants the video?
I use a keyboard all day, so I don't know.
Okay, that's all right. Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Writing's
Sure?
Writing's worse than yours, okay?
Thank you.
Do I just... Is that right?
No way.
Right, sorry.